Good evening, everybody. I'm just going to allow a few minutes, well, a few seconds or so to allow people time to join, and then we'll make a start. As you can see today, this evening, we have a CISEC branch masterclass with our East Anglian branch chair, Mel Turner, here with a masterclass on network airspace security. Super interesting topic. So we'll give it a little bit longer to allow you time to join, and then we'll make a start with the introductions. Just whilst we're waiting for people to join us, I'll quickly just run you through some of the house rules that we have for all of these webinars. I'm sure you're familiar with them already, but if not, you will be on mute throughout the duration of this webinar, but we will see your questions come in. So please do interact with our speakers. You can ask questions anonymously if you want to. Otherwise, we will read out your name. So please do ask as many questions as you want to. Don't hold off from asking them either. Just type them through to us and we'll be picking those up after the talks. If you have any issues at all today, then please let us know. The best thing to do is probably to email us at support@cisec.org, and another member of our team will be able to pick that up with you. Or we do have the chat function on as well today, so please do let us know. Please say hello in the chat and put your questions in using the Q&A box. But that's enough from me. I'll hand over to Mel.
Thank you, Sophie. So, well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for sparing some of your time for this. Myself and Andy Young, a colleague of mine, that we run the East Anglia branch of CISEC between us, really pleased to have the opportunity to introduce both Sarb and Peter around wireless security. So, from my own personal experiences, it's clear, security threats around wireless networking technology are generally only well understood by the subject matter experts, and then when you push beyond that, it's usually less understood in terms of you can't see the connectivity, therefore it isn't really front and center in terms of security. So I'm hoping, or not hoping, I'm sure that that Sarb and Peter are going to give us a good insight into why it is very important to understand this particular area of networking, because even some of the largest technology vendors sometimes are seen to drop the ball when it comes to wireless security. So it's certainly something we all want to develop and get better at. So I'm delighted that Sarb and Peter, two very well respected people in this arena, are able to take their time out to help with this. We are hoping to formulate another session which Sarb will elaborate on when he starts to introduce himself. So as I say, I had the pleasure working with Sarb in the past with other professional organisations, and he's got an immense drive and enthusiasm, and he will bring that to the wireless security arena. And I'm hoping that you'll get as much out of this call that I hope to get out as well. So without any further ado, I would like to pass you over to Sarb.
Thank you very much, Mel, and really appreciate the opportunity to speak to the members here. I am presenting with a good friend and colleague, Peter Bassill. We've known each other for many, many years. Peter has been a CISO in the past, so he understands perspectives from the CISO side of things, but equally, the work he does now is around pen testing, and he is CREST certified. So I'm going to pass over to him to introduce himself in a couple of seconds. But before I do that, in terms of my background, I've had a varied interest in lots of different things. About 2004, 2005, I did some research work on wireless network CCTV systems and looked at some of the vulnerabilities around them at all layers. I was amazed that every single layer was wide open at that time. Then I started to look at heating, lighting, air conditioning, burglar alarm, fire alarm. All of these things had the same sort of issues, and spoke to vendors, spoke to lots of people, and nobody was interested. And cut a long story short, from there to where we are today, I also did some work around sort of certifications, SAN certifications around auditing wireless networks. I've done a lot of work around IoT. I'm currently one of the executive steering board members of the IT Security Foundation. I'm also the co-chair of the IT Security Foundation Smart Built Environment Group. I work with some vendors in that field as well. I also work with AirEye. So I've got, if you like, lots of different hats that I play around this field. So what I'm going to be covering is from my own experiences or what I've seen, the good things and the bad things, But before we get into the presentation, I'm going to pass over to Peter to say a few words about his background. And he's got a really, really interesting background compared to mine. So over to you, Peter.
Oh, thanks, Sarb, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Pete Bassill. I'm the MD over at Hedgehog Security. I spend a lot of my time in Gibraltar and back in the UK where we run our business. But Hedgehog really is, we're kind of more of a lifestyle pen testing firm and security consultancy firm. And we do the corporate work to give us the means to do our research. So I've been in cybersecurity for a very long time, more years than I care to really remember. And I'm a self-professed wireless geek. When people talk about wireless, I can be talking frequency ranges from sub 1 gigahertz up to very, very, very high frequencies. And I've been doing a lot of work with radio systems on ships and looking around the GPS arenas and just seeing how secure or insecure they are. So when Sarb asked me to come and talk about airspace security, I pretty much bit his arm off. And if we'd been physically there, he'd probably be sitting there with only one arm at the moment. So yeah, thanks, Sarb. I've been looking forward to this. It's going to be quite good fun. Great,
thanks, Peter. Just to let everyone know, both Peter's voice and my voice is not very good at the moment. I had COVID. I'm recovering. Peter somehow through the internet got it from me. We reckon he's got COVID at the moment. He's recovering. So if either of us sound a bit rough, it is because we are recovering. So we will be sipping lots of water and so on. So apologies for that. Equally, that does tie into the fact that some of the work that we've been doing and presenting, this is one of 2 sessions. And this first session is around raising the awareness and the idea and looking at the background about some of the wireless things that Peter's talking about or mentioned already and we're going to be covering. But equally, it's not a technical session. It's not supposed to be. The technical part of it in terms of how we deal with these things that we're going to raise awareness of about today, that's going to be in the second session. So if you were expecting that we're going to cover lots of technical things about some of the different types of attacks that we've seen in great detail, that won't be for this one, that will be for the second one. What we're trying to do now is really get you to grips with understanding the extent of the problem and to give you a bit of a taste in terms of what we'll be looking at in the next session. We will be looking at the cyber kill chain for network airspace. We will be looking at threat modeling network airspace and some of those sorts of things and some of the attacks that we've seen out there. So we're not trying to cover those technical things in this session. So if you've got those sorts of questions, keep them for the next session. Here today, it's really about raising the awareness. Well, with that said, I'm going to move us on. Oh, sorry, one other apologies. I normally try and have more graphics within my presentations, but because of the health situation that we've been going through, they're not as many graphics as I would like. There's a lot of text, so I apologize for that. And later on, we will tidy some of this up and we will put some more graphics in place of the text as well. So those people that like graphic things, we will make changes to these slides. So the first thing I should really be saying is that, the disclaimer and the obligatory disclaimer that we have, because what I'm going to be presenting are my own views. They're not views of my employers or anyone I'm associated with. They're from my own experience. In terms of the agenda, we're going to be looking at wireless in the enterprise, some of the sort of differences between the wireless and wired in the past, the increasing demand that there has been for wireless from all sides, from everywhere, and where wireless and wired are today in comparison. And that's partly where Peter's going to come in and talk about some of his work. Where is the security in all of this? That's especially where Peter's going to be covering. And then in terms of the future and some of the new meanings of existing terms that we're looking at in terms of describing what we have seen that we need to be dealing with and to be thinking about a strategic and active approach to, looking at the network wireless security that we should be having at the moment. So going back a little bit then, really we got wireless into the network a bit like shadow IT, because, if we think back, in most organizations, they didn't consciously bring in shadow IT. It was a bit like this little cartoon here where, we know we've all gone through this in the past, where people bring in their little flash drive they found, Dropbox accounts, their free software. And I know that a lot of us as security professionals, we put a stop to that, in things like Dropbox. We put a stop to things like social media. And really, what we didn't take into account necessarily all the time was that there were so many things that users were trying to bring in the network that they had at home, that they did have wired and wireless within their own homes. And really, they were used to faster speeds in some cases within their own home networks than they were used to within the work environment. And if any of you listening today were like me at that time when wireless was coming in and some of these technologies I've mentioned were coming in, I guess I fit this cartoon in that I was a preventer of information services. Security is more important than usability. And I know that I've been guilty of focusing on risk in ways that was not for users. And I know that many security professionals were like that once upon a time. And I know that security now is very, very different. We take a very different attitude. But effectively, if we look at wireless and how it came into the organization, it did come in as shadow IT, because I remember many years ago in many organizations I worked with, people would say, oh, no, we don't allow wireless. But what they didn't realize is somebody just managed to pick up one of these because it was easy to set up, and it was cheap, and you could get it without getting an ISP. You could just go along to your nearest technology supplier and you could bring it in and you could connect it up, and it wasn't that big a deal because you could do it. And although many enterprises were saying that they didn't have wireless, they actually did, but just didn't know it. And that's the way that wireless managed to get in, and that was the starting point. But in terms of how it got in a much bigger way and why we've got it in the way that we've got it at the moment, there's no single reason, but a combination of lots of different factors that came into play. We had everything from the road warriors, sales staff going out, and more people not necessarily being office-based. And not only that, we had vendors of all the wonderful devices that were being created, the laptops, they came with wireless built in. And then on top of that, we had people who would theoretically be working from work and connecting with home or home to work. And going beyond that, we also had more and more devices like automation in manufacturing. And again, many of these things didn't really want sort of wires trailing about all over the place. So they were set up and they were developed to be working using wireless technologies and using those in lots and lots of different ways. And really, the idea was that, ubiquitous connectivity meant a ubiquitous enterprise. And that led to what we have got more recently, the ideas of the hybrid working and hybrid working much more effectively. And I know that when COVID came around, many organizations weren't actually ready for it. They were ready for connectivity, but that connectivity was all around the enterprise, within the enterprise, not necessarily working from home. But now we've got a change of all that, and wireless has extended to the outside world. In terms of the sort of slight differences and views of wired and wireless in the past, I mean, we've had slow pieces, we've had slow networks, and and if you think about wireless, you can forget that wireless being slow, but wired in those days was slow. It was really, really slow, and we got to a point where now, if we look at it, wireless is much faster than wired in many respects. We've had infrared wireless controls, we've had Bluetooth, And both of those were used in limited ways. And the majority of connectivity for a long time was wired, and corporate network and security solutions were for wired connections. They weren't necessarily for wireless connections. And wireless tools that we had were just the access points. That's about all we had. And then when we did start to have security solutions, it was the WIDs and the WIPs, wireless intrusion detection, wireless intrusion prevention systems. And many of these are all signature based. And many of these signatures, if anyone's done any work on this, are based on chipsets as opposed to other types of signatures. And if you're all familiar with signature-based technologies like antivirus and anti-malware, and all of those technologies have moved away from signatures, whereas WIDs and WIPs still rely on signatures. And if you think about it, if you have got a WIDs and WIPs, when was the last time you had an update to your signature base? Think about that and check it. If you look at the risk profile in those days, effectively it was zero to little, because we used lots of different protocols depending on what it was, and we used WEP when it first came out, and sort of wired and wireless balance was 95%. The 5% that used wireless were the special users. It was those that were road warriors, it was those that were CEOs and the CFOs and so on that had the really, really snazzy laptops. But that's been increasing and changing over the years. And in terms of wireless related security issues, yes, we have seen quite a few at the time with protocols, with WEP, with WPA, with Bluetooth, and these continued with the implementation of those protocols and the APIs. Configuration issues did and still do persist, whether we're talking about devices or we're talking about access points or we're talking about network devices. Whatever it is we're talking about, they do and still do persist. We see this in the work that we do every day. General attacks, denial of service, all of these have always existed and still do exist today. And near ubiquitous devices often lack the security by design principles. Many of these devices in IoT Security Foundation, we've seen so many that it's just incredible that so many new devices are coming in where there really is no security at all, default passwords, no encryption, no updates, etc., etc. So much so that we've got legislation coming in already, which is looking at trying to update this. In terms of wired and wireless today, yes, much faster, and it goes much further. Bluetooth is longer distances. Wireless on 2.4 and 5 and others as well, and you can get 6, is essentially similar. NFC is in use much more than it ever used to be, and we have got many smart things, not just using 3G and 4G, but in 5G as well. And speeds are comparable to many of these devices. It's similar to the old wired networks. Some are faster than that as well. Wi-Fi 6 speeds do increase as well, and we've seen wired devices which now constitute, in some organizations, 20% of all device communication. That means 80% of all the device communication in their organization is through wireless. Corporate wireless devices do account for 20% of all wireless airspace. And what I mean by that is, in the work that I do with AirEye, is that we've seen that if you look at the total airspace of an organization, that means not just all the devices within the organization itself, but all the signals around the building or the site, that organization itself, that enterprise, will its own networks and communication is probably 20% of all the surrounding networks that are around at that time. And in terms of that, we've seen sort of so many connectivity devices coming in which are wireless, including smart building controls where you've got air conditioning sensors, metering. It says security there, but that's not cybersecurity, that's physical security, critical plant alarms, support, heatings, lighting, so many different things. Equally, in terms of wireless connectivity. You know, we've seen surveillance devices. Cameras are just one of many surveillance devices that do use wireless. And often these things are built on functionality. That's what this image is trying to display, that these are very functional devices with lots of really good high quality functionality, but the security isn't necessarily always built into them. If you look at office automation, again, there's many devices, everything from coffee machines through to fridges, through to TVs, elevators, plug sockets, you know, energy switches, so many devices within the office, which, you know, aren't traditionally just bog standard devices, but now they use wireless and they are smart devices. And not just that, in terms of some of employees coming in, there's lots and lots of wearable, you know, implantable medical devices that they may or may not have. We are seeing many more of these within organizations as well, with people who do have these. And not just that, we're finding devices that are connecting in lots and lots of different ways. My apologies for this image, in the sense that what I was trying to display in this image, this is a bit like the Ring doorbell. Basically, the Ring doorbell connects in lots of different ways if you allow it to, connecting to your neighbors' networks and so on. And what I was trying to demonstrate with this particular image, and I know I haven't done it justice, was the fact that there are many devices now that connect in more than usual ways, and they're sort of connecting not quite peer-to-peer, but almost peer-to-peer, but with lots of devices. So there's a lot of that's going on as well, not just the number of devices, but the number of devices each device might connect to outside of a formal network that we're used to. And really, what does all this mean when we're talking about security? Well, for that, I'm going to hand over to Peter. So over to you, Peter.
Thanks, Sarb. Just need to apologise for the background noise. My twins are awake again. Okay, so what's all this mean for security? I think one of the main things that I've certainly seen over the past decade is with the rise and increase in adoption of wireless, there's been a belief, and for the IT department, this is probably a perfectly acceptable belief, that wireless is isolated to 2.4 gigahertz or 5 gigahertz, and it is purely to allow computers to connect to a network. I, unfortunately, for the world, think rather outside of the box. So I've got a couple of examples that I just wanted to talk about a little bit, and I'm not going to get into the technicalities of them. I'm sure Sarb will bring me back at some point to talk about those if everyone wants. The first one is there's been the whole bring your own device, bring your own disaster thing, but I like to talk about bring your own point of presence. And I see these a lot. Your average organization has at least one internet connected wireless device per person on site. And unsurprisingly, everyone knows that's your mobile phone. One of the real joys about mobile phones is they require power. So quite often you're going to see people plug in those phones into PCs or power sockets, etc., to get power and to recharge them. But unfortunately, and a lot of times, the moment you connect that device up to a computing device, it automatically acts as a hotspot or a modem, allowing a secondary previously detected path out to the internet, potentially blowing a giant hole in your perimeter security, and allowing more bad things in. Reasonably easy to fix, but it's something that I've seen specifically when I've been doing audits of firm security, and I've asked the question of, well, how many internet gateways do you have? And the IT department have turned around and gone, we have two. We have our primary and secondary. And then we start analyzing at a technical level. It's like, well, what about all of these different devices that are talking to the internet via this back channel? And it raises some questions as to how the configuration and what people should be doing about it. But the bring your own point of presence is really key to kind of understand that, you know, as organizations, we don't allow our employees to bring their own home laptops in and plug them into the network. Yet the computing power in your pocket on your mobile phone is well on par with the computing power of your average laptop. In some cases, it's more. So it's something to keep in mind, is that everyone has a point of presence on them nowadays, and it is very easy to harness. And if incorrectly protected, it's going to potentially cause some issues. So can you just bring on to my next slide, my bad HID slide. So one of the things that, kind of looking at the wireless space, and I said IT teams tend to think 2 gigahertz to 5 gigahertz, or 2.4 gigahertz to 5 gigahertz. When I look at it, I'm thinking 27 megahertz up to, well, as high as I can go on my frequency spectrums. So what happens down at 27 gigahertz? Well, 27 gigahertz is quite key, because that's where Logitech do their wireless keyboard and mouse. I think from memory, it was 2009, 2010, that I first met a chap called Max Moser, and he was talking about wireless security around these devices. And I've been following the work that he's been doing, and that's been followed on with people like Mark Newlin, who have further developed this. And since 2018, I've been using a deviation or a derivative of this work in my own pen testing, essentially allowing me, if I can get within wireless range of an organization, I have the capability to inject keystrokes across Logitech devices. But of course, I've not restricted that to Logitech. I've worked with a lot of the other wireless keyboard and mice now, to the point I have a select section which I quite happily send out to clients and go, well, here you go, here's a keyboard and mouse for you, and it will grant access. But the main thing with this particular attack, the thing that was really good was it would actually give me PowerShell capability on the end user device machine. And it didn't matter if a user would unplug and then replug in their dongle, it would remain persistent. Of course, I could never maintain persistency across reboots. But that all happened at the very low frequency spectrum. And one of the things that people constantly seem to misunderstand is the actual range of these devices. So at 27 megahertz, the range on your keyboard and mouse is quite small. So you actually need to get quite close to these devices. But Bluetooth, how far can you actually push Bluetooth? Well, in the outdoor environment, 1.15 kilometers is the furthest we've ever pushed a successful Bluetooth connection. Reliably pushed a Bluetooth connection is 997 meters, so a kilometer. And that's bidirectional at 2 megabits per second. That is a fair distance connection. The other thing is near field communication. NFC is really, really easy to clone, and a lot of organizations have looked at things like this and gone, yeah, we'll have NFC cards. We'll have them for giving access into our door systems. Those door systems are then connected in via Cat5 or structured cabling back into your network, typically for logging purposes. And these also are starting to have been hijacked in the past by using malicious NFC technology. Excuse me. So it's really opening up the attack vectors. And the thing with the wireless space, the airspace, is, that airspace within your business, within your organization, it can be massive. You've got, say, just 100 user organization. You potentially got 100 mobile phones that are outside of your control. that have potential to be plugged in. You've potentially got users who are coming into your organization, and they could be bringing in their own keyboard and mouse. I've seen it, and I've certainly taken advantage of it. So it becomes an awareness and a control thing. Sarb, can you just spin on to my next slide? So up until today, well, from 2020 to today, the last 2 years, I've kind of been looking very much at ulterior ways. So with the advent of the pandemic, the onset of the pandemic, organizations have moved very much to a remote operational capability, and they've done that absolutely correctly. And in the rapid adoption of wireless, there's been a couple of things that I've seen. Well, yeah, in the rapid adoption of remote working, sorry, there's been a couple of, I'd say, trip-ups that I've seen. So the first one was people went out and quite rightly purchased as many laptops as they could to allow for remote working. And that's brilliant. The second one they did was they decided to, a lot of organizations flooded their buildings with as many wireless hotspots as possible to allow people to move away, because desks are, well, real estate in buildings is very, very valuable, and desks are very close together. So the easy thing to do is to do mass wireless floods. And yeah, if you ask me, could I get into pretty much any network in 2020? So, well, it's really difficult because of the adoption of network access control. And a lot of IT departments have got that really, really well turned on. But then with the mass adoption of wireless and large rollouts of Wi-Fi hotspots, there wasn't enough devices that supported the NAC capability. So they just started putting in standard consumer devices, which then introduced further issues, and they were having to whitelist MAC addresses, and they were now unable to control a lot of the devices that are on the network. But with this came about a slightly different attack vector. So I got asked, is it possible to get into an air-gapped network? So I came up with the concept of the Jiffy Bag attack. Can I have my next slide, please, Sarb, my last slide. So my Jiffy Bag attack is essentially, it's an A4 sized bag, A4 sized Jiffy Bag with a 1400 milliamp hour battery and a Raspberry Pi with 2 wireless cards. And all I did was posted it to my client, knowing that my contact wasn't going to be in for a month, and it sat there in their goods in department, apparently just doing nothing. So Wireless Zero pretended to be the corporate network. Now I knew what the corporate network was, because I was able to walk up to their building, map out all of their wireless, and get all this information. Where the fun for me came in was Wireless One. So what you sent to Wireless Zero came out of Wireless One onto the corporate network. And essentially, I ran as a man in the middle attack, and it was there for 3 weeks, completely undetected. The battery power, I think the battery life lasted 96 hours. But in that time, we had over 400 people connect to the corporate network. We had 400 sets of credentials, and we were able to successfully gain access to the corporate environment via their wireless network using the data that we're able to capture. And how is this possible? Well, no one was looking for it. And that's really the main thing. You know, it sat there in a wireless Jiffy Bag in a goods in department, harvesting credentials for 96 hours of operational time, 3 weeks of elapsed time, and not in any time, not in any period during that time was it flagged as another wireless network access point or another device on the network. And that was really telling for their security team. It highlighted a very large hole within what they were seeing or even not seeing. So that's kind of where I've got to is, you know, wireless is very much the naughty child of the networking community at the moment. People, well, IT departments have got their wired networks really well locked down, and it's very, very robust and very secure. And I just think it's time that people start paying a little bit of attention to what they're doing in the wireless space and just thinking a little bit more to themselves of, can they actually see what's going on, and are they as well protected as what they really thought they were? Yeah, sorry, back over to you now, Sarb. You're on mute, sir.
It has to happen once in every presentation. Yeah, thank you. That was really interesting. Yeah, brilliant. So I'll come back with some questions for you later on. So we've talked about the past, we've talked about the present, and that's really what Peter's been covering. Now, moving on from here, you know, there are going to be changes, and really, just sorry. And some of the changes that are taking place within our environment in terms of wireless, the current growth of rate of growth of IoT wireless devices could result in you know, the wired devices making up anything from 5 to 8%. It could well be much less than that going forward, because everyone now is working and used to working using wireless. At the moment, what we're finding within AirEye is it's usually about 20%, but it could go a lot lower than that. And it's a combination of current devices stop using wired, and at the same time the number of wireless devices and IoT devices going up. So there's a combination of those two effects there. Then in terms of most devices, they are nowadays coming with several built-in wireless communication technologies, more than one quite often, if not two, then 3 or 4 quite often as well. Enterprise are restricting wireless in the office, but will accept it at home. There's many that people we speak to and friends of mine, they'll say, look, we don't allow wireless in the office, but they know that they allow it outside. Again, the sort of attacks that Peter's talking about, you can do them anyway. It doesn't have to be in the office. It could be absolutely anywhere. And most homes will completely avoid any wired devices. And if you think about it, it's just raising the number of wireless devices around and IoT devices around. A survey last year, in the first 3 months of COVID, they noticed that surveillance devices like wireless CCTVs, wireless burglar alarms and so on went up something like 60–70% in terms of sales. So these things are growing in sales, and they are increasing the volume and the overall growth out there. And all this means that, you know, the airspace around our enterprise and homes may be within the reach of many vulnerable devices to launch attacks with. And what I mean by that is you yourself may have very few devices or devices that are vulnerable, but the number of devices that you have might dwarf the devices that are surrounding you. And that's really what could be used to launch an attack against you, for example. And, you know, the question is, you know, are we going to see more malware on IoT devices spreading through wireless? There have been some already, but this session isn't to discuss those. We'll discuss those in another session. And around airspace, there has been trust. You know, we did trust wireless once upon a time. Yeah, it was great, fantastic. Then we did it again, but let us down. Then we did it with WPA2, and we're carrying on now, despite the fact that with WPA2, you know, there's a vulnerability that was considered severe in 2017. Yes, it has been fixed. It was very severe. And we're still continuing to trust WPA2, and so many devices are continuing to use WPA2, although there's WPA3, and any devices or access points that work on WPA3, they usually will degrade down to WPA2, because not every device that you have will be able to work on WPA3. Backwards compatibility obviously is important, but you know what will happen over a period of time is that WPA2 will become vulnerable. It won't be updated. There'll be more holes. There'll be more research done. It will become a bit like the WEP of yesteryear, in that nobody would want to be using it. But if you think about the number of devices we have around the world, in every single city, the millions of devices, that will be using WPA2. It just doesn't bear thinking about in some respects. And I'm not trying to raise alarm. I'm just trying to put perspective in terms of the number of devices that are being bought in terms of IoT devices that work on WPA2. And yes, I know that there's variations of WPA2. It's not completely vulnerable, but there are PSA is more vulnerable than EAS. Complexities in terms of risk posed by wireless and IoT. There is that ease that Peter covered in terms of bring your own point of presence. Yes, absolutely. We've got legacy devices, printers, TVs. You cannot buy a non-smart TV anymore. And many of the TVs that are around today, you can use Wi-Fi Direct. I'm not going to cover in detail the issue around Wi-Fi Direct, but Wi-Fi Direct is vulnerable. It has been known to be vulnerable, not the base standard, because the base standard is quite robust, but the base standard around Wi-Fi Direct effectively was such that the functionality that was within scope is secure, but what the functionality that a lot of vendors have added on top of that is what's vulnerable. And that's vulnerable in many, many different implementations by different vendors. We've got complex buildings and physical security in terms of insourcing, outsourcing, in terms of complexities of ownership of the physical security surveillance systems, life support. Also, the support life cycles are shorter than the in-use lifespan, and the lifespan of the configuration and the personal data is very different to the lifespan and expected, usage that vendors will give you. The responsibility for updating, patching devices always unclear. It's always difficult. We've come across many organisations that struggle with it big time. Difficulty of purchasing the dumb non-smart devices. Every device you buy now is smart. Whether it's a smart fridge and so on. Lots and lots of devices will take that same route that TVs are, in that you will not be able to buy dumb devices at some point. And users will bring their own vulnerabilities to an environment as well. We have been, this next slide I'm going to show you, it's a graphic I've been working on. I haven't finished it completely yet, but it gives an idea in terms of where the risks are. At the highest level, if you think about it, it sits in terms of the network, the corporate network, the non-corporate networks, other networks in the airspace outside your organization. You've got the authorized network, the unauthorized network, you've got third-party created networks, you've got employee created networks. In terms of below that, you've got different access points. Again, there's a different mixture of things that we come across and we see. Below that, you've got the devices themselves. And in terms of the device themselves, if you split them between those that have got wired and wireless access, those that have got wireless access only, effectively, those that come with wired and wireless, many of them have greater interfaces and more complex interfaces than the wireless only ones. In terms of what's on those devices, we've seen sort of in the past a whole range of different things within the device that has vulnerability, whether it's the OS itself, whether it's web server configuration, default installation. There's many, many things that can go wrong, and there is a stack. So I am working on this slide. This isn't finished by any means at the moment in terms of creating a stack and creating more detail in understanding where some of the risks might well be within a network. And creating some of the words I've used there, authorized, unauthorized, and managed and unmanaged, and so on. Been working in terms of refining some of the language and the granularity of the language needed to describe some of these things. Authorized networks or authorized devices or authorized access points. If you use the word authorized, the idea is it's managed by someone, and what we mean by managed I'll cover in a second, but the idea is it's managed by someone and it's compliant with corporate standards and policies. Otherwise, if it's not managed and it's not compliant, it's actually unauthorized. And further nodes, for corporate nodes, they must be identified, and you must make sure that if it is authorized, it should be listed as a corporate asset. If it's not listed as a corporate asset, then the question is, how authorized is it? In terms of managed, again, we've tried to refine the definition of what we mean so it fits in with authorized and some of the other definitions we've got, is that something is managed if there's an individual or team responsible for configuring, deploying, and overseeing its security. And if there isn't, then it's not managed. And if it's not managed, then obviously it's not authorized. All nodes must be managed regardless of who owns them, whether it's internal, external, whether it's outsourced, whatever it might be, it must be managed. And this management must include the activities of applying the patches and the updates. And in some cases, but not often, a node may be managed, but there's a conscious decision not to apply a patch, in which case there's an exception that you'd record and alternative controls may be in place to protect that node. So those are two definitions, two more very relevant ones in terms of the language I've used. One is compliant, and if a node is compliant, if it complies with the relevant standards, policies, and procedures, and really the compliance is according to what the enterprise has accepted for its compliance framework. And every organization is going to be different. So whatever your organization accepts, that's good enough. The next definition I've put there is controlled, and that's the longest one. I'm sorry, it's not meant to be an eye test at this slide, but the idea of controlled is because of things like Wi-Fi direct, because basically if you've got a printer that has got Wi-Fi direct capabilities, you can switch it off, but another user can come along and switch Wi-Fi direct on again, which means you've got no control over it. You may manage it, you may update the firmware and everything else, but unfortunately you haven't got control if some user can come along and switch Wi-Fi direct on. So I'm not going to go into great detail. Two other quick definitions, and then I'll sort of expand on a couple of other things in terms of, again, raising awareness as to what's going on out there. In AirEye, we've got two terms or definitions that we've trademarked. One is antenna for hire, which basically means any wireless device that's not under the control of the corporation or enterprise, but is within the airspace and proximity, which can be used by an attacker or potentially take potential control over it. And these could include laptops, it could be open source type things, it could be wireless router, it could be a CCTV, a TV monitor, it could be anything. Then the other definition is a wireless receptor. This is something similar to the antenna for hire, but it's within your own organization. And that describes anything which is within your authorized or unauthorized, theoretically within control, but can potentially interact with an antenna for hire. For example, it could be laptops, it could be PC, it could be dual connected printers, mobile phones, it could be anything like that. So really we use these terms to define what's open to attack and then can be used to get into your network. That's what these two terms are for. Now, the invisible entry points, really, in terms of wireless receptors, the key thing about this slide is what I mentioned earlier on, you've got 20% of wired and 80% of wireless in most organizations. And that could include things like, wireless receptors like the dual connected printer, laptops, which may well have been connecting to Starbucks 20 minutes ago. Now, the person has come along, docked it in, but hasn't turned wireless off, and it's still looking, trying to connect wirelessly to Starbucks, for example. Next, we've got this one. This is the invisible attackers. This is the outside. This is the antenna for hire, where, again, if you look outside, it's quite often much, much bigger in terms of what the surrounding is. And your wireless network is dwarfed in many respects. And although at the moment, in many organizations, most of the technologies around wired networks, they're not focusing on the wireless, and that is odd, and it's not necessarily a good thing. What I'm going to go to now is the fact that you can do lots of reconnaissance. If anyone listening, if you use this tool called wiggle.net, this will show you all the different access points that have been identified in almost every area that you care to mention. This particular slide is showing the New York Stock Exchange, and in detail, you've got here this slide, it's showing a potential unauthorized network access where, if you look, you've got circled in orange, you've got 2 printers that are within the stock exchange. And at the moment, if you noticed earlier this week, HP printers with Wi-Fi Direct have got vulnerability, which is about 8 years old, and it affects many, many, many printers. And that's what that's trying to illustrate there. Again, this session here, I'm not going to go into great details. What I want to do just very quickly is show this slide. And if you look at the timeline between 2005 to 2018, there wasn't much that was going on in terms of airspace and attacks and research going on. But now, since 2018, I said 2008, meant to say 2018. Since 2018 to 20 and 21, there's been a lot more work going on. And if you look at the kink up there, it's where there's an explosion in IoT and more wireless receptors and around generally. I'm going to move on fairly quickly because I want to leave some time for questions. The challenge is that there's a lack of visibility for many organizations and a lack of wireless policy enforcement. And examples of that are, for example, in terms of complexity we have is in medical devices. You see there 4 different types of things, technologies there. You've got the medical device itself, you've got a medical station tool, corporate network, local access point. If you look, we found this within a hospital, there's 5 different possible ways of connections to the corporate network. One is directly from the medical device, the other is medical device through the bridge routing device. Then it could be the medical station to the medical device to the corporate network, or the medical device through a bridging router, which is the same medical device, or a sister medical device through the network, or from medical station to a bridge PC or laptop to the corporate network as well. And we have actually seen this within client sites. So there's many ways that in terms of wireless, that it's possible to for people to get in. We do sort of help to try and look at creating policies for wireless. And at the moment, the wireless policies that people have are very, very limited because they're focused on just on 802.11 internal, and they only focus on access points. Policies should be considering wider wireless devices which have a signal strength reaching your airspace and out of your airspace. It should be both ways. The changing environment is changing, and it is outside of our control in many respects, slightly or by a long shot, whichever way you like to look at it, but it is outside our control. Despite the fact that it's outside of our control, what we need to be doing is thinking strategically about it. The wired networks are architected and they are managed strategically, but network airspace needs to be strategically managed too, to be able to deal with what the threats are out there. And how else can you use threat modeling or utilize a kill chain if you only focus on the wired network and not the wireless network as well? Very quickly, I'm going to go through 2 or 3 slides. So we do come up with policies related to wireless networks, and this is something I've worked on in quite a lot of detail. So these are some of the elements. These are some more elements, and this is, and I'm going through this very quickly because I want to sort of get towards the last slide and leave some time for questions. This particular area and sort of defining was for a client where they had so many different areas of how they needed to control and what they were allowing. It's very, very complex environment, very complex development of their policy. All this leads to the fact that what I'm working on and Peter's working on is that we're creating what we call Network Airspace Security Forum. We had very early stages with some security leaders involved. Mel is also involved in it. And the idea is that we'll set it up similar to the Cloud Security Alliance or OWASP, and we start looking at network airspace security in a more formal way, and we do a lot of research, produce good practices and things like that. And the idea is it will meet many, many stakeholders' needs as opposed to one individual group. If you are interested, please do keep in touch with myself and Peter and Mel. This first session was really to raise awareness about the issue of network airspace security, not necessarily to go into technical details. We will have another session where we will look at some of the attacks, some of the threats. We will look at threat modeling. We will look at the kill chain as well. So I'm going to end there on questions. So I'm going to pass back to Mel to sort of manage that, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely, Sarb. No, thank you. And to be honest, Sarb, if you got paid by the amount of detail that you put into the presentation, I think you'd, yeah, you do well. So thank you. It was really, really informative. I guess one question for me, I suppose, is in terms of what you think will accelerate a strong security posture in wireless technology, do you think it would be maybe autonomous vehicles, aeronautical, medical? Is there any one area where you think there's an absolute focus on driving risk out of wireless capability?
That's a really good question, and I think that it's a difficult one because every single one of those industries that you've mentioned is accelerating very, very fast, individually and independently of each other, in leaps and bounds in how they are making things more usable. And part of that usability is around connectivity. And I would say there isn't any single one that will push awareness more than another. They're all very, very independent, and we're working with all of those industries, and there's no similarities between them. They're all, as I said, completely independent.
Okay, thank you, Sarb. So there's no questions in the Q&A at the moment. Just Sophie, have you got anything at all that anyone's raised? I've got one. When is the next session scheduled for? So in relation to that, it will probably be in the new year, probably January, February, I guess, yet to be defined, but be sure that we'll make sure that we give plenty of notice for that. And yeah, it would definitely be distributed. So just keep a watchful eye, please, and that'll definitely be forthcoming. I guess, Peter, probably an open question to you, really. The one thing that worries you in terms of wireless security, is there one specific area that really, you feel as a practitioner is really an exposure that is just too much?
I think the thing for me, the one that really concerns me, is the connected cities. With the adoption of at the moment semi-autonomous, leading to autonomous vehicles, and the way in which connected cities are evolving, there needs to be significant more work at bringing a cohesive security layer across everything. Unfortunately, the way I see it, it's all going to go very wrong for someone at some point in the future, and it won't be pretty, but that will be the catalyst for making it work. I'd rather see things get done right before that happens.
Yeah. Just a point there. The challenge is, for many, is that if you can't see what's going on, you can't control it or do anything about it. And I think the biggest challenge that people have is that they don't know what's going on. There is no visibility, and that's what they need to tackle first. They need to look at how can we get better visibility of the airspace. And in smart cities, again with my other hat on, there's a lot of work that needs to be done around there, because the idea is that if you look at the goal of the smart cities is partly to connect to smart buildings. So if you're connecting smart buildings to smart cities, and smart buildings are connecting to smart infrastructure is connecting smart homes. Basically, we're just talking about connecting absolutely everything to the city and anything and everything else. And I totally agree with you, Peter. It is worrying, which is why I do the work I do with the IT Security Foundation. We have been working on guidance on many of these things. Yeah. Totally agree.
Thank you. No, thanks both. Conscious we're coming up to time now. I know, Sarb, you've got a hard stop as well. So if anyone's got any additional questions, please just take a note of them, because we will have this second session, which, as Sarb alludes to, will be a bit more technically biased and maybe picking up on this capability of this OWASP type function as well. So yeah, please, please look out for it. Please take note of anything that you've got on your mind that you haven't had the opportunity to raise today. And what I'd like to just do is a massive thank you to both Sarb and Peter, both of which aren't feeling very good, and Peter's still coping with COVID symptoms at the moment. So a massive thank you for not sort of jeopardising this call and putting that first. It really is appreciated, and thank you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting us, and to the team as well behind you, who've put this together. It's been really smooth. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.